Kept checking the calendar on my phone, not because I was waiting for anything good, but because I needed to see it written down. October 14th, my 67th birthday. There's something strange about getting older. You'd think by 67 you'd stop expecting things. Stop waiting for a call that might not come. Stop listening for footsteps that used to rush down the hallway toward you. You'd think you'd have learned. I hadn't. I'd been up since 5 that morning. Old habit. 32 years as a high school history teacher will do that to you. Even in retirement, my body refused to sleep past dawn. I'd made coffee, stood at the kitchen window of my apartment, watched the parking lot below fill up slowly with cars. A Tuesday. People going to work, the world moving exactly the way it always did, indifferent to the fact that it was my birthday. My son had called the night before. Not to wish me well, just to confirm I'd be coming to dinner at his place the following Saturday, not my birthday. The following Saturday. "We've got something to discuss with you, Dad," he'd said. And his voice had that particular flatness it gets when he's already decided something and is only going through the courtesy of telling me after. His name is Conrad. He's 41 years old, works in commercial real estate, drives a truck that costs more than I made in 3 years of teaching. His wife is Nadine. She's pleasant the way a waiting room is pleasant. Clean, organized, designed to make you feel temporary. They have a daughter, Lily, who is 9, and who is the only reason I made the 40-minute drive to their house every other Sunday without fail for the past 6 years. I set my coffee down and tried not to think about what something to discuss might mean. I was getting good at that, not thinking about things until I absolutely had to. I should tell you something about the money, because that's the part that matters later, and I want you to understand it wasn't something I went looking for. My brother Eugene passed away in March of that year, younger than me by 4 years. A fact that still doesn't sit right in my mind, the way a picture hangs slightly crooked. And you keep noticing it no matter how many times you walk past. Eugene had never married, never had children, spent 40 years working offshore on oil rigs, living simply, saving quietly. We weren't especially close as adults. Geography and stubbornness kept us at arm's length. But we were brothers. We understood each other in the way that only people who grew up in the same cramped house can understand each other. What I didn't know, what I had absolutely no reason to expect, was that Eugene had been quietly building a portfolio of investments since his 30s, index funds mostly, a few rental properties in Louisiana. Some energy stocks bought cheap in the 90s that had compounded in ways neither of us could have predicted. The attorney who called me in late March was matter-of-fact about it. Eugene had left everything to me. The total value after taxes and fees came to just over $2,400,000. I sat in my car in the parking lot outside the attorney's office for 20 minutes before I drove home. I didn't tell anyone. Not Conrad, not Nadine, not the neighbor I sometimes had coffee with on Sunday mornings. I'm not sure I could explain why exactly. Part of it was grief. Part of it was the particular instinct of a man who has lived long enough to know that money changes the temperature of every room it enters. I put everything into a trust, managed by a financial advisor named Gerald, whom a colleague had recommended years earlier. I kept my apartment. I kept my routine. I didn't buy anything new. I told Gerald to let it sit. 7 months later, on the morning of October 14th, my 67th birthday, I stood at my kitchen window with my coffee and thought about Eugene, and about how the two of us used to fight over the last piece of bread when we were boys, and how neither of us ever had enough of anything until, apparently, we did. I arrived at Conrad's house that Saturday at 6:15. Nadine had made pot roast. The table was set nicely. Lily ran to the door when she heard my truck and grabbed my hand and pulled me inside, and for a moment everything felt completely normal. We ate. Conrad talked about a development project near the waterfront. Nadine asked about my knee, which I'd had scoped in the spring. Lily showed me a drawing she'd made of a horse. I told her it was the best horse I'd ever seen. She told me that was obvious. Then Lily was sent to her room to finish homework, and Nadine cleared the plates without being asked. And Conrad folded his hands on the table the way he does when he's organizing his thoughts, and I knew we had arrived at the thing I'd been not thinking about all week. "Dad," he said, "we want to talk to you about the long term." I said I was listening. Nadine came back from the kitchen and sat down. She and Conrad exchanged a glance, the kind that means the conversation has been rehearsed. Conrad said they'd been doing research, said they'd looked at several options, said there was a place about 25 miles north, new facility, very clean, activity programs, a medical staff on site. He said the word community 3 times. He slid a word community 3 times. He slid a brochure across the table toward me. I looked at it. The cover had a photograph of an elderly man in a cardigan sitting in a garden, smiling at nothing in particular. Assisted living, I said. Independent living, Nadine said quickly, like the distinction was important. You'd have your own unit, completely private. It's really more like an apartment complex for old people, I said. Neither of them said anything. I turned the brochure over. On the back there was a monthly pricing table. I looked at it for a moment, then set it down face down on the table. I'm 67, I said. I drove here myself. I cooked Thanksgiving dinner 3 weeks ago. I walk 4 miles every morning. Conrad leaned forward. We know, Dad. That's why now is the right time. Before anything changes, it's better to be proactive about these things. I looked at my son. His face was careful, concerned, or performing concern. I couldn't tell anymore where one ended and the other began. Nadine was looking at her water glass. I thought about asking him directly, whose idea was this? When did you first start researching it? Was it before or after you mentioned wanting to convert the guest room into a home office? But I didn't ask any of that. I sat with it for a moment. Then I picked up the brochure, folded it, put it in my jacket pocket, and said I'd think about it. The drive home took 40 minutes. I didn't listen to the radio. In the weeks that followed, I noticed things I'd probably been not noticing for longer than I wanted to admit. The Sunday visits became less regular. When I called, Conrad picked up about half the time. Nadine started texting me information, links to the facility's website, a PDF of the room options, a schedule of the activities programs, independent living. As if saying it a different way would make it feel like something other than what it was. One Sunday I drove out anyway, unannounced. Lily answered the door, happy to see me. Conrad came out of the kitchen with a dish towel over his shoulder and a look on his face that I can only describe as inconvenienced. He said they were about to go somewhere. I said that was fine. I wouldn't stay long. I just wanted to see Lily. We sat on the porch for 20 minutes while Conrad stood inside near the window. Lily told me about a project she was doing at school on ancient Egypt. She said mummies were wrapped in linen because Egyptians believed a body needed to be preserved for the afterlife. She said she thought that was both creepy and kind of beautiful. I think so too, I said. When I left, I sat in my truck at the end of their street for a while. I thought about when Conrad was Lily's age 9, 10 years old, and how he used to wait for me at the end of our block when I was coming home from school. How he'd see my car and start running. How I couldn't get out of the driveway before he was already telling me everything that had happened that day. I thought about where that boy had gone and whether he thought about where I'd gone too, from his perspective. A man who was useful until he wasn't. A father who became a responsibility. I thought about Eugene, sitting on an oil rig somewhere in the Gulf, watching the water, saving money he never spent on himself. Then I put the truck in gear and drove home. The document arrived on a Thursday in November. Not a brochure this time. An actual printed form from the facility, a preliminary enrollment agreement. Conrad had apparently moved past. Think about it. There were 2 sticky note arrows pointing to signature lines. A handwritten note from Nadine clipped to the front. Just the first step, no commitment. We can tour together this weekend if you want. I set it on the kitchen table and made a cup of coffee and stood at the window again. I'd been in my apartment for 11 years. I knew the crack in the ceiling above the bathroom door. I knew which step on the stairwell squeaked. I had a tomato plant on the balcony that I'd been nursing through its 3rd winter. It was not a grand life. It was mine. I called Gerald that afternoon. I asked him to set up a meeting for the following week. I wanted to discuss some changes to the trust structure, some decisions I'd been putting off. He said he'd have his assistants send me calendar options. Then I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia, who had handled my affairs since my wife Sandra passed 8 years ago, and I told her I needed to update some documents. She had an opening on Friday. I did not call Conrad. I'm not going to tell you I felt nothing during those weeks. That's not true, and I've never been interested in pretending otherwise. There were nights I lay awake and missed Sandra so much it felt physical. Missed having someone in the house who knew me before I got old, who would have looked at that enrollment form and said something that cut straight to the heart of it without needing to be careful about anybody's feelings. Sandra had a way of saying the true thing without cruelty. I've never been able to figure out how she did it. Conrad got her eyes and her stubbornness, but not that particular grace. I thought about whether I was being unfair, whether Conrad genuinely believed this was the right thing, whether Nadine had convinced him, whether fear of what's coming, what's always coming, was making him do something he might regret later. I tried to give him the benefit, but then I'd see the enrollment form on the table and think about those signature lines and know that whatever the explanation was, my son had decided something about my life and was waiting, patiently, for me to sign my name to it. I wasn't ready to do that. I took Lily to the Natural History Museum in early December, just the two of us. Conrad had a client lunch, Nadine had agreed to it, and Lily had been asking me since September. We spent 3 hours there. She had strong opinions about every exhibit. She thought the dinosaur section was overhyped, but stood in front of the ocean life display for almost 20 minutes without saying anything. In the car on the way back, she asked me if I was going to move into that place Daddy keeps talking about. I said I hadn't decided yet. She looked out the window. "I don't want you to," she said. "You're too far away already." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said I agreed with her. She fell asleep before we got to her street, and I carried her inside, and Conrad was there in the hallway, and for a moment he looked at his daughter asleep against my shoulder, and something moved across his face that I couldn't read, something that might have been the memory of being carried somewhere himself, or might have been nothing. He took her from me without a word. I let myself out. January came cold and flat. I'd made my decisions quietly. Gerald had restructured the trust. Patricia had updated my documents. What I owned, what I'd built from Eugene's gift, was organized in a way that reflected my actual wishes rather than the ones I was expected to have. I did not put Conrad's name anywhere that mattered. I put Lily's name in several places that did. I called Conrad on the Tuesday evening and told him I'd made my decision about the facility. He said he was glad, that it was the right choice, that we could go tour it together this weekend. I said I wouldn't be touring it. I said I'd thought about it carefully and I was staying in my apartment. I said that if and when my circumstances changed in a way that required different arrangements, I would make those arrangements myself. The silence on his end was about 4 seconds long. "Dad, I'm not finished," I said. I said it quietly. "I've also updated my will and the trust I've been managing. You'll hear from my attorney when the time comes. But I wanted you to know that I've been thinking about the future too, my future, and I've made decisions I'm comfortable with." He asked what that meant. I said it meant exactly what I'd said. I told him I loved him. I told him to tell Lily her grandfather would see her Sunday, and I said goodnight. He called back 20 minutes later, then again the next morning. I let them go to voicemail. Nadine called that afternoon. She said they were worried, that I'd seemed off lately, that they only wanted what was best. I listened to the whole message. Then I put my phone face down on the counter and went and watered my tomato plant, which had, against all reasonable expectation, produced 3 small tomatoes in December. I ate one standing at the kitchen window looking out at the parking lot, tasting something that had grown slowly in a difficult season and was, despite everything, exactly what it was supposed to be. It was late February when Conrad found out. He'd had a conversation with a colleague who happened to know Gerald professionally, a small world coincidence of the kind that seems impossible until it happens. The colleague had mentioned casually that Gerald managed a fairly substantial trust for a retired educator named Arthur Calloway. My name. Not hidden, not secret. Just never mentioned. Conrad called me on a Wednesday night. His voice was different. The careful flatness was gone. In its place was something rawer and less composed. He asked me if it was true. I told him it was. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked why I hadn't told him. I said I'd been asking myself the same question about a few things lately. He came over that Saturday. Without Nadine, he sat at my kitchen table. The same table where I'd set that enrollment form 8 months earlier. And he was, for the first time in years, not performing anything. His face just looked like his face at 9 years old, running down the block toward me, needing to tell me everything. He asked if I was angry with him. I thought about it honestly. I was hurt, I said. There's a difference. He asked about the will. I told him what I'd decided and why. I told him Lily's future was something I'd thought about carefully. I told him I wasn't punishing him. I was being honest, finally, about what I valued and why. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said he thought he'd been thinking about me the wrong way, that somewhere along the line he'd started seeing me as a problem to be managed rather than a person to know. He said he wasn't sure when that had happened. I told him I wasn't sure either. He asked if there was a way back from it. I thought about Eugene saving everything in silence, dying without someone who knew the full shape of his life. I thought about Sandra, saying the true thing without cruelty. I thought about Lily, standing 20 minutes in front of an ocean display, not needing to explain why. Yes, I said, but it takes time, and it starts with Sunday dinners. Just dinner, no agendas. He nodded. And Conrad. I looked at him steadily. I'm 67. I walk 4 miles every morning. I grew tomatoes in December. The next time someone decides something about my life, I'd like to be in the room. He looked at the tomato plant on the balcony. He almost smiled. Not the performed kind. The real kind, the one he got from his mother. That thing is still alive, he said. Apparently, I said. It doesn't know it's not supposed to be. I've been thinking about what I'd tell someone going through the same thing. Not advice, exactly. I'm not in the business of telling other people how to live. More like something I wish someone had said to me earlier, before the enrollment form showed up on my kitchen table, before I spent all those nights lying awake, missing Sandra and talking to no one. Here's what I know. The way people treat you is rarely about you. Conrad didn't see a father when he looked at me those last few years. He saw a variable in a plan he was trying to manage. That says something about what fear does to people. Fear of aging, fear of responsibility, fear of a future that's coming, whether you schedule it or not. I'm not excusing what he did. I'm just saying I understand it better now than I did sitting in that parking lot after the attorney's office, too stunned to start the engine. The money didn't change who I was. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I was the same man before Gerald called and after. Same apartment, same 4-mile walk, same tomato plant that had no business surviving December. What the money changed was the clarity. It removed a particular kind of pressure that I hadn't even fully named until it was gone. The pressure of needing someone else to decide things for me because I had no other option. Eugene gave me that. Not intentionally, maybe, but he did. And what I learned from Eugene, honestly, is that a life lived quietly on your own terms is worth more than anyone around you might give it credit for. He never had Christmases with grandchildren. He never had someone waiting at the end of the driveway, but he built something real, steadily, without needing anyone to notice. There's a kind of integrity in that which I've tried to carry forward. The hardest part wasn't Conrad. The hardest part was admitting that I'd let things drift for longer than I should have. I kept not saying things, kept giving the benefit of the doubt past the point where doubt had any benefit left. That's not patience. That's avoidance, wearing patience's coat. I've had to be honest with myself about that. What I'd say if I were saying anything, don't wait for someone to decide your life is inconvenient before you start deciding it yourself. That's not stubbornness. That's knowing who you are. Clearly enough that no one can hand you a form and expect you to sign away the rest of it. Treat to and sell. Real intelligence isn't about what you know. It's about knowing yourself well enough that you stop being surprised by your own choices. Conrad asked me if there was a way back. I told him yes, and I meant it. But I also meant what I said about needing to be in the room. That wasn't a threat. It was just finally saying the true thing. Sandra would have said it years earlier, and she would have done it without raising her voice. I'm a slower learner than she was, but I got there. Lily is still the best thing going. She told me last Sunday that mummies are both creepy and beautiful. She's not wrong about most things.